Yes. Hello. Today on this channel, I would like to begin a series that I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is just basically kind of lore explorations, lore analyses of concept albums, rock operas throughout the years. Basically, albums that tell a story, or artists that have an overarching lore that kind of goes throughout their discography, which is a rarer thing, but cool when it happens. Um, I think a lot of times with concept albums or rock operas, the person writing it will have this very grand, elaborate narrative in their head, but it can often be kind of difficult for the listener to parse. You don't have that visual element to go along with it, like when you're watching a musical on stage or screen. So, you know, occasionally the the narrative aspect of it can get kind of diminished, in comparison to the just the visceral kind of experience that you typically get with music. So I just kind of want to go through these albums, explore their narratives, go into them in detail, maybe illustrate some things in them that were parts of the stories that maybe you'd overlooked, or you didn't necessarily realize the significance of. And I want to eventually get really crazy with this. Like, we'll do like really incomprehensible shit like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. We'll do like, bands like, just off the top of my head, like the Hold Steady and Blue Oyster Cult, where they have lore that goes over multiple albums where they're building this larger story. Um, we'll do all that stuff later. Maybe even Coheed and Cambria. I know there's a guy who wants me to do Coheed and Cambria. Coheed and Cambria lore is fucking nuts. We'll do it eventually. But we're gonna start with like a really easy one. We're gonna start with the Who's Tommy, which is a very straightforward narrative for the most part. It usually gets credit for being the first rock opera. If it wasn't, it was certainly like a very, very early example of that style. And it, if Pete Townsend wasn't the first to write one, he certainly popularized it. So basically, what we're gonna do, I have, of course, created a dynamic and visually dazzling PowerPoint presentation, and we're just going to go through and talk about the Tommy narrative in kind of a very broad way, you know. So we begin circa like 1916, I think. Captain Walker going off to fight in World War One. This takes place in England, as you might imagine, and he leaves his pregnant wife at home. His wife is named Nora. That's her in the movie, being played by Anne Margaret, and she soon gives birth to this guy, who is Tommy, played by Roger Daltrey in the movie, the singer of the Who, as you might know. And then we have our first time cut. We cut to 5 years later in 1921. We know it's 1921 because there's a song called 1921 about how it's 1921. And, by this point, Captain Walker has gone missing. He's presumed dead. And Nora has moved on. She has a new boyfriend. And they're really happy together. But then, shockingly, Captain Walker comes home. And it's really hard to tell what's going on in this part in the album just from listening to it, and I think it's kind of sloppy, honestly. Like, you don't have to spell it out for people, but give them a clue or something, because I mean, if this was a Roger Waters, Pink Floyd record, there would be a gunshot here to signify that there has been a homicide occurring with a handgun, because that's what happened. Captain Walker comes in the door. He sees the two of them together. Nora with her boyfriend. Once again, this is not her boyfriend. This is Tommy. And he gets very angry, as you might imagine, and he shoots the boyfriend and kills him. Now, Tommy isn't like in the room watching this, but in all of the visual representations of it, Tommy sees the murder in a mirror. He's looked away, but he can see it in the mirror. I don't know if that's true on the album. Once again, that's not really specified. But yeah, we are to presume that Captain Walker kills the boyfriend, and then the parents notice that Tommy has seen this, and they're freaking out, as you might expect, and they're like shaking him and yelling at him and telling him to that he didn't see anything or hear anything, and that he's not going to say anything. And Tommy takes that to an incredible extreme, and just in his trauma, just completely shuts down and becomes blind and deaf and unable to speak. Then we have our next time cut to Tommy when he's older, and he's still not doing so hot. And there's a song called Christmas where his parents lament that all their other kids are real excited and happy at Christmas time and running around and having fun, and Tommy's just completely shut down, lost in his own world, doesn't even know what Christmas is, has no conception of Christmas as far as they know. And it's it's very sad, because they there was this inciting incident here where they traumatized him real good, and that trauma has clearly still not worn off, not even slightly. And Tommy's dad compares him to Jesus, which of course Jesus allegedly suffered for our sins. It's not the most original comparison, but it's in there. It takes place on Christmas. Tommy is paying for the sins of his father, you know, and so on. So, Tommy's dad is getting desperate. He's trying to figure out, what can I do? How can I possibly reach my boy? And he ends up meeting this guy, the Hawker, who is kind of a flim flam man, to use the parlance of our time. And he basically tells him, I have this wife who's, she has her methods of reaching him, and she's gonna cure him. You just got to leave him with her. And this is the Acid Queen, played in the film by Tina Turner. And her solution is just basically to do sex stuff and things with Tommy, and then fill him full of drugs, specifically LSD. And it does not help. It does not help, even a little bit. And Pete Townsend has said about this that that it's really more of an exploration of of drugs and self-destructive behavior in general, which he was certainly engaging in a lot at that time. And it's just basic. What he said was, I can just read this quote. The Acid Queen song is not just about acid, it's the whole drug thing, the drink thing, the sex thing wrapped into one big ball. It's about how you get it laid on you, that if you haven't fucked 40 birds, taken 60 trips, drunk 14 pints of whatever society people force it on you. She represents this force. So, yeah, basically, despite her best efforts, Tommy does not improve. And it doesn't help that he's constantly being terrorized by people like Cousin Kevin, who bullies him constantly, and his Uncle Ernie, who molests him in a very uncomfortable and perhaps unnecessary aspect of the musical that I, personally not a big fan, not a big Uncle Ernie fan. And basically, there's a through line with all these people, which is just basically they're all on their face, they're all, offering to help Tommy and make his life easier and make the life of his parents easier. But in the end, they're all just using him for their own ends. And all of them just push him deeper and deeper and deeper into his shell, right? And what lets him out of his shell is pinball, which is a very important and organic aspect of the story that was in no way forced into the narrative to please one random music critic. Basically, Tommy discovers that he's really good at pinball, even though it doesn't seem like he even knows what pinball is, because he can feel the vibrations. He can feel the vibrations of the table, and it makes him good. He can play by feel. You've heard the song. This is him playing pinball in the movie. This is Elton John in the foreground here with his giant boots. he is the titular pinball wizard in the film, and Tommy has to beat him to become the reigning pinball wizard, which of course he does. Spoilers. Um, so basically, this is Tommy's first brush with fame. People think it's pretty cool that this kid who can't speak or hear or see is like this pinball prodigy. So he starts to get some fans out of this. Um, but he doesn't know. It's all the same to him. Then they find a doctor who purportedly can cure their son. In the movie, he is played by Jack Nicholson, which is kind of a bummer because Jack Nicholson, great actor, amazing actor, not an amazing singer, you know, and he gets to sing what is, in my opinion, the best song in the whole musical, um, "Go to the Mirror," and yeah, it's not ideal, but on the album it's fine. On the album it's great. And so basically, like all the other people who have said they can help Tommy, the doctor, checks him out and is like, I can't help Tommy. But he does offer them some important information, which is that there's nothing medically wrong with Tommy. As you might, you know, as you might have inferred already, that basically Tommy had this very traumatic moment where he was freaked out by what he'd just seen. He wanted to do what his parents told him to do because he was a little kid. Your parents are like gods when you're a little kid, and you want to do what they say, but at the same time, he was basically processing so much stuff at the same time that his brain broke. And so the doctor tells us what we might have already guessed, which is that Tommy's condition is psychosomatic. It's emotional, and there's nothing that can be done medically to fix Tommy. So then Tommy's mom gets the idea. She sees Tommy, because one thing that he does, one of the very few things that he does, is just kind of stand in front of this mirror and stare at himself, even though he can't see his reflection, allegedly. And this, of course, the film relates this back. Once again, I don't know if this is the case on the album, but in the film and the musical, he observes the murder in the mirror. So that kind of ties everything together. But yeah, his mother encourages him to smash the mirror. Well, actually, she smashes the mirror, but once she does, well, in the movie, he appears to be smashing the mirror. In the song, she smashes the mirror. No matter who smashes the mirror gets smashed. And then Tommy feels way better. He's like back to normal. Instantly recovers his hearing, recovers his vision. And he can talk. He can do everything. And he's real excited about it, and so is everybody else, because this guy has obviously made this miraculous recovery all at once, and the news of this spreads. And Tommy, who was already like a minor celebrity, probably a local celebrity for his pinball abilities, becomes a much bigger celebrity. And as it is with celebrities, people begin thinking, that he is someone to they have to see in person, and get to know and like touch, and all this cult of celebrity stuff, you know. And so he starts to hold talks because people want to know what he has to say, and he builds up this fan base, which is represented in the song Sally Simpson, which is actually like one of the most narratively dense songs on the record. It's basically about this girl named Sally who's like infatuated with Tommy, and she knows that she's too plain for him, that Tommy could be with anyone, and why does he want to be with her? But she still holds on to hope, and she goes to this event where Tommy is speaking, and she just wants to get up on stage and just touch him, you know. And she goes for it. She tries, um, and Tommy's security throws her off the stage, she hits the ground, cuts her face open, has a big gash on her face, and Tommy, if he notices, he doesn't seem to give a shit. He just kind of goes on delivering this talk, which is ironically about how everyone should love each other and be nice to each other. And then there's a postscript where she marries a rock musician she met in California many years later, which you know you can extrapolate out from that. That basically she's in a way she's kind of settling. That she got as close as she could to being with the person of her dreams. She can't be with Tommy, but at least she can be with a guy in a rock band. It's probably a different level of celebrity, but it's something. So basically, Tommy's fan base, it kind of rapidly expands. Tommy invites them all over to his house, but very quickly there are way too many of them. His house can't hold all of them. So he starts something called Tommy's Holiday Camp, and basically this is um, a natural extension of being a cult leader. At this point, his fan base has basically become a cult who follow his every word. And so this is basically his compound, you know, this camp where people can, listen to his pronouncements, and they can all live there and bask in his glory. And so they all show up at the camp to hear what he has to say, and he's basically just like, wow, I completely forgot there was, yeah, that's Sally. We're at the camp. I forgot there was a PowerPoint presentation. That's fascinating. Anyway, we're at the camp now, and they're waiting to hear what Tommy has to say. And of course, Tommy, is like, he tells them what he knows, which is just basically the way that I discovered all of these important life lessons is that I used to be deaf, dumb, and blind, and then I suddenly had my sight returned. And also, I played a lot of pinball. So, what you have to do is basically, wear a blindfold and plug up your ears and put a gag in your mouth and start playing pinball, and then you do that for long enough, like he did it for like 20 years or so. And if you do that for long enough, then when those constrictions are removed, you will have a revelation like Tommy did, and you'll be able to appreciate life just as much as he does. um, and he's also kind of a narc, and he basically tells them, no drinking, no drugs, because he had that bad experience with the acid queen when he was a kid, so he's not a fan of drugs. What's weird is that Uncle Ernie, who molested him as a kid, is helping out with the camp, which I never understood. Because you could say he didn't know what Uncle Ernie did to him, but the fact that it's all psychosomatic, it calls into question, how much was he aware of? Was he more aware than people gave him credit for? If it wasn't a medical problem, there's a bit of a gray area there. But it's probably just Uncle Ernie doing what he always does, which is just trying to take advantage of a situation. And if he can make any money off Tommy, he's going to do it. Um, but yeah, Tommy tells them his philosophy, and they are not a fan, and they reject him, and they get really mad, and everybody leaves the camp, and Tommy's all alone, right where he began, and it's kind of a bummer. And that is essentially the album. Now, there was, of course, a film version of Tommy as well. The film version had some notable differences. For one thing, there were 3 songs added. There was Bernie's Holiday Camp, Champagne, and Mother and Son, none of which like radically alter the plot or anything, but they do offer kind of more depth to the characters and whatnot, and a little more detail to the lore. One of the big changes the movie made is they shifted the timeline. So the last one, right, began in 1916 thereabouts, and then the inciting incident, the murder, happened in 1921. In this case, they didn't really want to make it a period piece, so they start the movie in 1945. Captain Walker, instead of being in World War One, he's now in World War Two. And we cut to 5 years later, and now instead of being 1921, it's 1951. So it's basically the same song, but with a five instead of a two. And now the guy who she's dating is more of a character. His name is Frank, and Tommy really likes him. They all seem to get along great. And Frank works at a holiday camp, and Tommy is inspired by that. He thinks it's cool, and he's like, maybe someday I can run my holiday camp. And Frank's like, that's fucking great, kid. And then so Captain Walker comes home, uh, and you would expect him to murder Frank, but that is not what happens. There is a reversal here. I keep forgetting that a PowerPoint exists. So this is Frank. There's a reversal now, and Frank ends up killing Tommy's dad. So in this, the boyfriend is the one who becomes Tommy's dad and raises Tommy instead of Captain Walker. So that's an interesting change. And in the film, it's much clearer the way this is all set up. We see the murder take place. We see Tommy see the murder occur in the mirror. And then Frank and Nora, swarm on him and do the whole traumatizing him real good thing. And so that's all pretty much the same. So I mean, basically, we can skip right to the end because there are changes throughout, but they're fairly minor. Tommy, one difference is that they put more emphasis on the pinball section of the film, and the first time that Tommy gains a little bit of popularity, and there's a song, Champagne, where his mom talks about how she thinks it's kind of cool that he's, getting notoriety, but she can't really enjoy it because he's still, her son is still suffering. Um, so, the big difference comes at the end, where it's basically the same, but it gets a lot more extreme. All of Tommy's followers, they show up at the camp, and they're like, "Teach us your pronouncement, so great one." And he does, and he's like, you gotta be mute and blind and deaf and play pinball. And they're like, "Fuck that." Um, and they start a riot, and it goes much worse in the movie. They kill Nora and Frank. They burn the camp down and completely destroy it. Tommy finds the dead bodies of his parents and feels real bad about it. And then he escapes into the mountains and sings "See Me, Feel Me" on top of the mountain as the sun rises. Uh, so so yeah, it's basically the same ending, but much more extreme. Um, but then we have the stage version, which once again brings about some changes. It didn't retain the the new songs from the film, but it does have a new song of its own called "I Believe My Own Eyes," which is just basically about the Walkers realizing, oh, our boy will, we'll never make him better. We might as well give up. But we'll get to that. So for some reason, they have to keep futzing with the beginning of the movie. Particularly the song 1921. So in the movie, they changed 1921 to 1951. And in the musical, from what I understand, she's singing about being 21. Like, my 21st year is going to be a good one. Which means she got pregnant with Tommy when she was 16, which is maybe a topic they explore in the show. I don't know. But yeah, in this one, the inciting incident with Captain Walker, it's a little different. Um, in this version, Captain Walker, he parachutes into Germany, and instead of being presumed dead, he's captured as a prisoner of war. Um, and so basically, he's a prisoner for the next 5 years. Nobody knows that he is. They don't know what happened to him. And so yeah, his wife moves on as she always does in all the other versions. And then yeah, Captain Walker comes home in 1945. He's saved by the Americans, and the prison camp is liberated. And then he comes home, and Captain Walker shoots her boyfriend in this version. So it's not like the movie where the boyfriend shoots Captain Walker. In this, they stay true to the album, have Captain Walker shoot the boyfriend. Now, Captain Walker actually goes on trial for the murder in the stage version. And this is one area where I think the stage version is improving on the original version, because it always kind of bothered me that the murder is, a pretty minor part of the narrative, all things concerned. Like, it is the reason Tommy's deaf, dumb, and blind, but it's just like there are no other repercussions from it. It never comes up again, and it's a pretty major event to just, it's in one scene and then there are no repercussions. So in this, at least, there's a bit more to it, where he goes on trial. He's found not guilty of the murder, because he manages to convince them that he did it out of self-defense, even though he definitely doesn't. Yeah, so he gets off for the murder, and he goes home, and Tommy doesn't know it's Christmas, and he's very upset. The only thing that Tommy responds to in this version is Uncle Ernie playing the French horn. He seems to be drawn to music. There's a difference in the Acid Queen segment, which is, instead of leaving Tommy to get messed up by the Acid Queen and filled full of LSD, Captain Walker kind of sees what's going on and freaks out and gets Tommy out of there, which is nice. But Tommy's dad ends up taking the situation a lot harder than he does in the film or the album. And once he realizes that the Jack Nicholson doctor can't help his son, he's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And he just leaves. He just leaves Tommy with his mother to raise him as a single parent, until and obviously that makes the mother even more desperate, leading to the smash the mirror sequence, and Tommy's senses being restored. Now, there is a part near the. Let's put it this way: they make Tommy a nicer guy in the musical. In the original version, in the movie, he's maybe not outwardly manipulative, but kind of oblivious, kind of egotistical, kind of doesn't understand what he's getting himself into. In the stage show, he appears to be a nicer, more considerate guy. So, like, for example, when Sally falls off the stage and she gets the cut, instead of just ignoring her and going on with the talk, Tommy is concerned about her, and he goes over to her and checks her out. And then he's like disturbed by this event, and he goes home and he's like, "Oh no, am I getting too famous?" And Uncle Ernie, this is another thing that I think is an improvement. Uncle Ernie is more outwardly just trying to capitalize on Tommy's misfortune. He makes like shitty, cheap souvenirs, koozies and mugs and t-shirts and stuff for the opening of Tommy's holiday camp. So he's just trying to leech off of him much more explicitly here. And once again, I think that's a good change, because I don't think Tommy would want to work with him willingly. So during the moment where he gets the chance to talk with Sally after her incident, she basically asks him, how can I be more like you and less like me? And this freaks Tommy out, and he's just like, there's no reason for anyone to be like me. I have these gifts now, and that's why people are interested in me. But you've had these gifts all along. You've had your your sensory perception all along. So he realizes that it's more than just that his senses were miraculously restored. That these people, they want a spiritual leader. They're hoping that because he went through this very unique, singular experience, that he can give them some kind of wisdom that nobody else can. Um, but it's kind of reversed in the musical, and I think this is actually kind of a cool change, which is that in the original version, Tommy tells them to deafen and blind themselves and stop talking and play pinball, and they reject it and get mad. But in the stage version, Tommy does the opposite, based on the revelation he has during the Sally Simpson incident. And this is yet another improvement, because Sally Simpson is just kind of thrown in the in on the album and in the film. And in this, she actually has like a real impact on his life, and she's an important character. So in this, he gets up at the end and he tells them, "Don't be like me. Go and live out your own lives. I'm not more special than you inherently just because I've been through this shitty thing. You're all special. You're all equally valid, and you shouldn't live like me. You should live like yourselves." And this still makes the audience really mad, because they wanted him to have answers and they wanted him to have some great revelation, and he doesn't. He just wants them to go home and resume things as normal, and that really pisses them off. So they all leave the camp. They don't murder his parents and burn the camp down in this version, which is considerate of them. And then it's almost like Tommy is going to like revert back to his old state for a second. It's almost like, is he going to go back into that unresponsive realm? But instead he just, gives his parents a bunch of hugs and stuff, and makes peace with them, and he reunites with the guy who played the younger version of him on stage, and they're all this, it's like, he makes peace with everything, and it's all going to be okay. So in general, the stage version is, just kind of a nicer, more gentle version of the story, or so it would appear. I haven't actually seen it, but yeah, that is Tommy in all of its most notable revisions. And Pete Townsend wrote several albums like this, so maybe next time we'll do Quadrophenia. Quadrophenia is also not that challenging, and then from there we'll get into some of the crazy shit. We'll do some of his solo albums, like Iron Man and White City and Psycho Derelict, and we'll see where we go from there. I realized it might be useful for me to try to like offer some analysis of what this is. And what I'm going to say here probably isn't going to like blow your mind or anything, but for some reason I analyzed the Acid Queen section, in more depth, but nothing else really. So I should, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I do think, it's Pete talking about, the excesses of that time and the excesses he indulged in, and kind of wanting to move beyond that. I certainly think that's a component of the story, but I think it's also about trying to release yourself from blame too. That Tommy wasn't responsible for the death of this guy. He didn't shoot him. And yet he is the one who is punished more than anybody else. And he punishes himself, because he has this guilt, because he just stood by and watched this happen, and that he had to keep this horrible secret. So I think it's kind of about freeing yourself from the weight of your past, from the weight of things that make you feel guilt or shame. And it's about also overcoming the deficiencies of your parents and your childhood, and moving beyond those things and becoming an adult who's your own person. you know and I also think it's largely about the ending. I think really brings home that you need to find your own way to enlightenment. That, everybody is looking for the answer, and the answer is not a thing that exists, because the answer, if you find it miraculously, is going to be your answer. It's going to be the answer to your question, you know, and you can't answer your question with somebody else's answer. That just doesn't make sense. So all these people are hoping that Tommy could just provide them with these answers so they wouldn't have to find them for themselves, because that's a frightening thing, to have to do things on your own. But ultimately I think that's true, that anytime anybody makes any real progress in life, it has to come from within. It can't be what somebody else wants you to do or what somebody else is expecting from you. It has to be something you want for yourself, you know and so I think that in the end, I mean, on the album and in the movie, Tommy doesn't realize this, and his advice is like, you want to learn what I've learned, just be like me, do the exact same thing that I did, and then you know, if you go through the exact same process, you're obviously going to figure it out too, which is bullshit. And everybody at the camp realizes, rightly, that it is bullshit, and they get real pissed off. I don't think they had to murder his parents, but that's neither here nor there. But it sounds like in the stage show, which once again I haven't seen, which I should check out. But in the stage show, it seems like Tommy does realize this, and he does say, "You're all looking for me to provide this answer that I can't possibly provide to you. Like, I found my own way to this more enlightened state. I found my own answers, but your answers, are your own. We don't have the same problems. We don't have the same solutions to those problems. And it's just like, don't look to somebody else to to figure out your own life. I think is basically the point. Which is a wonderful lesson. I think a scary lesson, but a wonderful lesson and a very valid one. So yeah, I think that's good.